Hello, this is the International Schools Podcast. I'm your co-host, John. Dan, hello. Lovely to see you.
Hi, John. I've been away for the last few episodes. It's been a very busy time with kids' activities and travel to the Middle East. So I'm sorry for that. I'm great to be back on and looking forward to being on the next few episodes.
Great. Yeah. And you've been really busy traveling. And I know your organization has been very active with this idea of Gemini AI tools within an education space and supporting educators and schools around the world as actually setting up these Gemini accounts within the Google Education workspace. This is kind of an interesting development.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably 50% of our time now is, because we're Google partners. So Gemini, and then you probably, we know, we already discussed Notebook LM, which is Google's, your way to create an internal AI on your own documents and resources. So a lot of schools using Notebook LM, a lot using Gemini. We've had a couple of schools in Singapore get Gemini licenses for all their staff. Obviously, Gemini is Google's AI. You've got OpenAI is the biggest, and I guess in Microsoft Copilot, if you're in the Microsoft ecosystem,
and then Anthropic, of course.
Sure, yeah, another one. There's loads, obviously.
Yeah, it kind of never stops.
Yeah.
It's like everybody is, and now Meta has released a chatbot that streams the feeds. And what's really interesting with that one is if you want to see everybody else's chats and interactions with the chatbot, you can enable that, which I just find so strange. I think what I'm finding is the acceleration is so fast. How do we have time to reflect and say, what is this doing to us? And I think today, Dan, one of the reasons we have our guest is he's somebody that does such a deep thinking about this topic, and he's done a lot of work on assessment. And I think for schools, many schools, the biggest challenge has been suddenly the assessments are actually not really impactful when kids have AI. And what does that mean? And I always tell people you can't have an assessment looking for an answer. You need to have an assessment looking for a process and thinking and unpacking this and show. And I think this is super challenging. And Leon Furze is our guest today. Leon is based in Australia, and he is a consultant, author, and speaker. And he's over 15 years of experience in secondary and tertiary education. Leon is doing his PhD in the implications of general artificial intelligence. And Leon also holds multiple roles in schools and board leadership. And he's also the director of teaching and learning and head of English and eLearning. Leon has done some fantastic work on assessment, and I know many, many educators that listen in on us will have looked at his assessment work and the kind of overview. He has a scale of assessment, which is just phenomenal in the way it breaks it down in very manageable ways. And yesterday, he and his colleagues just released AIassessment.com. And so that is in the show notes. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, go and look at it. Leon, long introduction, but thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, John. I'm just glad that you didn't use ChatGPT to write my introduction, which a lot of people have been trying for the last 2 or 3 years. That one comes out even longer. So
no. I those kind of things I still like to have a handle over. I'll be honest, for me, my being dyslexic, my spelling and sentences are terrible. So usually what I ask it is says, please use the same text, but just correct it grammatically. That's what my ChatGPT is really good at, because I really am a bad speller and my sentence syntax is useless. So I find it does a really good job of honoring my voice, but fixing the grammar up. So yeah. I don't know, Dan, do you use it for spelling and stuff?
I do. I use it in emails. I use with Gemini. I use Gemini obviously mostly. It's embedded in the individual Google apps. So in Gmail, you've got Gemini embedded. So I use it for formatting. I don't. Some things I don't use it. Like the newsletter I do every week. I actually don't use AI at all, and I've even said a couple of times on that. I think there's so many newsletters and so much LinkedIn content now, which is obviously AI generated. If I see it, I just skip past it. I'm not interested. I don't read any newsletter that's AI content, and I know that's maybe taking it too far. because I am very pro AI. I see the benefits of it, but in terms of content, I like to read something that's original. As much as I can tell, it's original.
Yeah, absolutely.
When something's clearly a chat GPT article, I'm not even going to read any of it.
So I had the pleasure of, I've been following Leon and listening, and I had the pleasure of him being part of a keynote. And one of the things that I really liked was his focus was, what is an AI literate educator? And I thought, what better person to kind of unpack that? And so, Leon, really, my first question to you is, if you think of how AI is advancing faster than maybe education can. Education, I think often it takes time. We're dealing with human beings, children, young adults, and sometimes change has to be far more cautious, but for good reasons, because you want to be pedagogically sound. You need to think of the social emotional impacts of those changes. And in a system like a school with so many moving parts, it's really important to be really implicit about what you're doing. And if you think of all these different things that are happening, and I have the pleasure of doing workshops for schools around the world on AI, I'm finding that there are people that have just ignored it. Other people are engaging with it. Other people are like on steroids and they're doing everything. And there was even a thing from Harvard that said that we're really shifting from more kind of tool oriented to more personal life, and using AI to help us with our psychology, our therapy, some of the things that we're thinking. So in your work, because you've done extensive work in this area and you work with many educators around the world, can we keep up?
I think an important question is how much imperative is there to keep up? And I wrote an article, I think I published it earlier this week on Monday, around this idea of inevitability that's sprung up around AI, and like any technology, any new technology, there is this narrative of the inevitable, keep up or you'll be left behind kind of narrative, and I think it's it's unhelpful. And it's part of broader conversations that say things like, oh, well, the education system needs revolutionizing, or classrooms aren't fit for purpose anymore. And my argument against that stance is, how many classrooms have you been into recently, the people who are saying that? When I go into classrooms, and I worked in a school for 15 years, and I'm in schools now weekly, running presentations and things, I see teachers doing really great things with their subject expertise. I see teachers doing great things with technology all the time. I don't see Victorian era rows of desks and chairs like the cliched posts that we're seeing on social media. And when I hear about AI is inevitable, or you have to get onto AI now or you'll be left behind, what I'm hearing is a sales pitch from technology companies. I'm not hearing the reality of the schools that I'm working with. I'm not hearing the reality of the teachers and the students. Now, that doesn't mean that the technology is not already ubiquitous, because it is. And it doesn't mean that the technology is not important, and that it won't, make big systemic changes, because it will. But I think we've got to be really conscious of, the rationale for teachers engaging with these technologies. We've got to say, well, why are we bringing them into our classrooms, and why are we working with our students in this way, and not just, well, the technology is inevitable, so you better get on board now, otherwise, we're going to be 200 years in the past.
Do you think this attitude where you need to get on board or you're going to miss miss the boat, counter to what you're saying is, let's really stop and think about why we're using it? What is, how is it purposeful? How is it authentic? Where does it fit in pedagogically in a school? Do you think that's why often you get some pushback from teachers, is like, hold on here, I don't have time, or this is going to pass?
Time's the big one, obviously, in any schools. And I work with schools in the States, in Europe, across Southeast Asia, and obviously here in Australia and New Zealand. And everybody's saying the same thing. But often when I hear, oh, there's no room in the curriculum, what that actually means is our curriculum is narrowed to this point by these tests that we have to do along the way. And when people say the education system isn't fit for the modern world, or the curriculum is outdated, often what what they're talking about is those moments in time, those, you know, whether it's SATs or NAPLAN here in Australia, or GCSEs or A levels, or, you know, whatever. Those things that sort of direct and narrow the curriculum to those smaller points are where the issues are. If you look at, I'll take the Australian curriculum as an example. I'm from the UK and I did my teacher training in the UK, but it's been 15 or so years since I taught there. So I'll take Australian curriculum. There are so many opportunities in the Australian curriculum to talk about AI and related technologies. You know, you can look at the English curriculum and talk about bias and misinformation. You can look at mathematics and talk about linear regression and algorithms. You can look at the sciences and talk about data analysis, or the comparisons of machine learning and human brains. It's all there in the K to 12 curriculum, but we don't teach any of it, because what we teach is this little tiny part that's on the test. And that's because of the way that schools are, you know, the way that schools are ranked and judged and held according to those things.
It's interesting. With the schools we work with, I mean, international baccalaureate is the predominant, you know, curriculum, although we work with a lot of British, there's a lot of British and American ones within the international school world, but it is, you know, a huge, that is one of the main focuses is training, is getting kids through, getting good grades in the DP, isn't it? The diploma program at the end, John. I think it's schools pays. If you look at, we talked about this before, but when the results, the IB results come out, every school is like, what was our average score in the diploma program, you know? So I think it is a huge focus of a school, and it often cuts the time down of teachers to focus on other things when that's what the focus is.
Yeah, and I think so for so many teachers, they are measured by the success of their results. That is their own assessment. You know, we assess kids, but schools and parents and communities, when they look at good results, that reflects on those teachers. A teacher, say the math department keeps getting good results. Well, indirectly, every teacher in that department is getting a tap on the shoulder saying, you're doing a great job, because the results are so positive. So I think sometimes the creative tension, and Leo, I would love you to kind of jump in and share your thoughts, is that how do we validate teachers when we don't have test results that validate them? You know, what are the things that we're going to do to say, well, tests are actually out of date, they don't work. And in this world of AI, and I'm kind of creating a scenario that's imaginary, but you know, now that there's AI, assessment tests don't work, you need to do something else. And the teacher's like, well, how am I going to be measured? How are you going to validate? How do I know that I'm doing a good job, or that you're going to amplify that through the websites once a year that we're doing well? I don't know, Leo, what do you think when there's that shift of measure?
Yeah, I mean, teaching's one of the hard parts of the job, is that the outcomes aren't immediately tangible, are they? I mean, you know, my dad's a plumber. If he fixes a toilet, you can tell pretty quickly whether he's fixed the toilet or not. And with teaching, if I deliver a lesson to a class full of literature students, I don't know if they can understand Marxist critical theory immediately. And the only kind of system level means we have to assure that is through those methods that we have of assessment. But that's sort of putting the cart before the horse in a way, because then we're saying, well, then the point of education is assessment, which obviously it isn't. So if we're looking at the product of assessment, or the product of teaching and learning being, you know, can the student pass this examination? Well, then sure, that's easy to measure. Everything else, that's the really hard and much more important conversation.
Yep.
And so in your work, because you started this a few years ago, so when AI came out, you obviously decided, I'm going to do a doctorate specific in that. Were you already doing a doctorate, or did that kind of the advent of AI, suddenly you were like, oh, I need to change my topic? Because what was it that suddenly made you think, oh, I need to focus on this?
I will talk about this at any opportunity, because I like to say I was there first. So what happened was I decided I was going to leave the classroom and my school leadership role and go into consulting, just around literacy and running teacher training and reading and writing. And then a couple of weeks after handing my notice in, May 2022, my now PhD supervisor called me up and said, hey, there's this opportunity, full-time PhD studying digital writing. And that can be whatever you like, I know that you've got a blog. I know that, you're interested in multimedia, whatever. So I said, yeah, sure. I'm going to apply, and I'm going to focus on these automated writing technologies that I'm starting to hear about. And I was even starting to see my year 12 students in particular were using these paragraph rephrasers and spinners and stuff like WriteSonic and Jasper and little third-party apps that were built on GPT-2 at the time. And November the 1st, I officially started the PhD. So I've done all this work around what are these language model technologies. We weren't saying generative AI at the time. And then just, less than a month later, ChatGPT was released and just totally floored everybody. But I had, like a 6-month advantage of the right place and the right time just to kind of start getting my head around it.
So that 6 months advantage allowed you to kind of really dig in deep, because very quickly you start releasing content for educators on AI and assessment. Why AI and assessment and not, say, writing or other things? What was it about the assessment piece that suddenly because you really talk about in your scale, you have the idea of no AI planning, the collaboration component, and then you also have the full-on AI integration. And then in this new iteration, you have this idea of AI exploration. What was it that assessment suddenly became the focus? Why was that more important than something else?
So, 2023, I just launched out of the classroom and into this new role. And I'd come from, 5 or 6 years as a head of English, and then a few years as a director of teaching and learning, sort of a AP curriculum kind of role. So my career had been very concerned with teaching and learning and assessment and curriculum design. And I had a conversation, I was running some professional development with a university here, Edith Cowan University in Perth. And we were saying, so what are the implications of this technology? What is ChatGPT? Really early days conversations. And even then we acknowledged you couldn't have this kind of dichotomous ban it or let everybody do everything approach, because banning and blocking any technology just generally fails. There's too many technological workarounds for students, and just kind of really permissive or pretending it doesn't exist would fail as well. So I offhandedly in this webinar with ECU said, something like a scale, like like a no AI at one end and full AI at the other. And I just wrote a blog post about it. It was picked up by Mike Perkins at British Uni Vietnam and Jason McVaugh at BUV, Jasper Rowe at James Cook Singapore. And they said, look, we like this idea. Can we adapt it for use at British Uni Vietnam? We did that. We published some papers, and then the whole thing just kind of snowballed into the version that we've released at the end of 2024, and the AI assessment scale website that we released yesterday as we're recording this.
Yes, absolutely. And make sure that you go to the show notes for our audience, because Leon shared a lot of great stuff, and also that new website. When you talk to educators, Leon, what are kind of profiles are you interacting with when you go into different schools? How people are engaging with AI? Are there certain dispositions? Do you notice there's a pattern? You could categorize educators into different groups, the way they're engaging with this?
I think that with most schools that I'm going into, even now, sort of 2025, two and a bit years on from ChatGPT, most are on that curve of, there's a few users at the top end who've been using ChatGPT since day one, and they're using it for absolutely everything, sometimes in really sophisticated and nuanced ways. At the other end are some people who just haven't touched it at all. They haven't cracked the lid on Gemini or ChatGPT or any of those platforms, sometimes because they're just not interested, sometimes because the technology has just kind of escaped them, and sometimes because they are personally opposed to using the technology. And then everyone else is somewhere in the middle. There's a lot of people who they played around, they dabbled with ChatGPT in late 2022, 2023. They weren't super impressed. They haven't really gone back to it. They've got bigger things to worry about. They just haven't had the time.
Dan, do you see that in the work that you're doing? Because you're approaching schools, and schools are saying we would like a license for every teacher. Are you noticing similar patterns in the work that you're doing?
I think it's all over the place in terms of teachers specifically. I mean, I think that's a really rare case where every teacher is using. I think if we're being honest about it, a lot of international schools, you've got, I'm just going to guess a number, like 60% of the teachers have zero use or knowledge of AI. Maybe half, maybe it's 40%, maybe it's 30%, but it's a meaningful number. Just putting their head in the sand, I think, and not using it. And their only real thought about it is plagiarism and stopping students, putting plagiarist assignment. I think then you've got the other half, and again, I don't have any statistics on these numbers, but where there's a grade, like I think your scale is really good. I think there's a full range of terms of how they're applying. A lot of teachers using things like Magic School, a lot of these sort of teacher-based tools and student-based tools. A lot have just purchased their own personal Gemini accounts or ChatGPT mostly. I don't know, John. What's your experience in school? If you take the school you're working at now or other schools, do you see something similar?
I think what Leon shared is very similar, this arc. You have people that are being super sophisticated. I think schools that approach me, that I'm doing workshops, I think they want like a prompt. They want an opportunity to have people start thinking about it. So often the approach is like a few provocations, some case studies, and working with that. And I think that gets people thinking. I think the other thing is, I find when I work with leaders, and I'm really engaging leaders, then they're becoming very reflective on how they should lead with AI in the context of their school, and what they need to understand, and especially the issue of time and professional development and being super empathetic with everything else that's going on. So I think it's really a mix. And Leon, when you were doing the presentation, you talked a bit about kind of the ethics of educators being involved in AI. And one thing that you did highlight in your presentation that I want to kind of come to is this idea of misinformation and deepfakes. And I was really quite impressed, or even not surprised, because you really spoke with a very stern voice about this idea of misinformation and deepfakes, as this to you was one of the big issues that we need to come to terms with. Is that still the case in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one thing that was a really big advantage for me getting that little jump on ChatGPT was that I had the opportunity to look into some of the issues, some of the complexities of the technology. And, I read up on the bias, and I read up on the privacy issues and the copyright concerns, and, all of this stuff that was going around at the time. And deepfakes in particular are, they're not a new technology, and they're not, strictly speaking, just a generative AI technology, but AI image generation has made it easier to produce deepfakes. And the societal implications of that, I think, are huge. Already in schools, we're seeing an uptick in deepfakes made of students and so on. Legally, across the world, there is legislation coming in to make changes and to criminalize specifically AI-generated deepfakes. But I think that we're not prepared for it. And we all work with schools or in schools. We know that our primary concern is the safety of our students. This technology, if we think about image-based deepfakes, this is a real significant risk that I think if we're not talking about it in schools, it's just going to kind of come out of nowhere. Generally, when I'm in schools,
cyberbullying and student well-being, or in terms of just misinformation and
I'm talking specifically around deepfakes and image-based abuse there, and the use of deepfakes, sort of non-consensual, explicit deepfakes and those things. I think misinformation is a really big societal issue. And I think that's, if we're looking at politics at the moment, and we're just going into an election here in Australia too, I think that's a huge societal issue that affects, more broadly just outside of education. But I'm seeing deep fakes and that side of things become increasingly prevalent in schools, and I'm not seeing schools adapting to it very quickly.
Do you think part of the issue is that this technology is new and many teachers, their professional development and their long life learning has been connected to past practices more, and this new technology requires new pedagogic learning, and then maybe schools are finding it challenging to ramp up or even find the time or make it a priority when you have assessment, you have a lot of other things that teachers have to do. I'm wondering, what would you want to see schools do differently that they are not doing now?
To sort of bring it back to the point that I made earlier, I think that there's a lot of talk at the moment around AI literacy, and a lot of, there's the US executive order to make all schools and teachers AI literate, and students, and all of this stuff. And I think what it sidesteps is the fact that AI is not just a thing that can be taught. It's a very broad sort of system level technology that has implications left, right, and center. So I think that what teachers need to be able to do is to talk about AI and the implications of this technology within their areas of expertise. So, I think we maybe can't do that within some of the restrictions of those testing regimes that we have. But within our normal curriculum, there's definitely scope in there to talk about those really important ideas. And in my experience working with schools and also through my PhD, if you get a group of teachers who are passionate in a particular subject area, and you give them a little bit of knowledge around what this technology is and what it can do, they put those, they connect the dots, and they come up with really fantastic ideas of how to talk to students about the technology. Whereas if you just go, okay, here's a session on AI, here's some AI literacy for you, they kind of go, yep, great. Now I'm going to chuff off back to the classroom and teach maths.
So it's really giving them the tools and the knowledge so they can actually intrinsically be motivated to start looking at that through the lens of, say, be it science or social studies. That's where you're seeing the success.
And, yeah, and the space to work with one another. I ran a session on Monday at a school in Sydney, and the majority of the day was just those faculties talking amongst themselves, and they came up with some amazing materials and ideas.
Is it we're just challenged to find that space? Is that what you're noticing? Is that there's just not, that space is not being able to be carved out in your experiences as you work with schools?
Absolutely. I mean, where do schools find that time and the space? And I guess part of an issue there is that teachers and schools have to sort of be everything for everyone. So creating that space is really hard.
And do you think, so if you were going to talk to a teacher, we have 3 teachers in the room. One is like, I'm not going to deal with it. The other one is like, I'm interested and curious. And the other one's kind of going ahead. What are some of the conversations that you're engaging with? What are some of the things you point out to people that might be more resistant to the use of AI compared to the ones that are fully engaged?
I want to know why they're resisting, and there are some really valid reasons to resist the technology. I mean, it's a nightmare, isn't it? It's ethically sort of dubious, as we've talked about already, and we look at OpenAI's image generation and their kind of cavalier attitude towards copyright, and companies like Suno and Udio scraping all of the music clean from the internet and then producing AI generated music. It's an ethical nightmare. If they are opposed to it from that kind of moral or ethical stance, then that's a good conversation to have. If they're opposed to it because they're worried that students are just going to cheat, that for me is that, that's less of a concern. Okay, let's change your mind around this just being a cheating technology. So it really comes down to why that resistance is there. The other side of that is, if they are resisting from those personal stances, I know a lot of arts teachers who really object to image generation, for example. What are you going to do to acknowledge the fact that your students are still going to encounter this technology? How are you going to talk to them about it? How are you going to prepare them for it? Even if you don't personally agree with the technology, what are you going to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so interesting the way you come back to the importance of really understanding the why. Why is your disposition such, or why is the way you're engaging with it? We had a guest a few weeks ago, Francis Q. Hung, who's a AI entrepreneur, and he's quoted, "Not engaging with AI is pedagogical malpractice." What do you say when you hear a quote like that, Leon?
I saw a similar quote, not exactly that, but I saw a similar quote last year in an article that said pedagogy needs to catch up with AI. And I wrote an article in contrast where I flipped around and said, look, AI needs to catch up with pedagogy. Because if you look at, again, the reality of what's happening in classrooms, there's a lot of really great stuff happening in classrooms. If you try to generate the lesson plan with something like ChatGPT or Magic School, you get wallpaper paste. You get something very vanilla. The way that a lot of people are talking about AI as if it's this kind of amazing solution to all of our problems. But the output of it sometimes is pretty underwhelming. And if I compare something, just generated in one of those platforms to something that a really great teacher can produce, there's no comparison. And I think sometimes people have an idea of what education is based on their own experiences of being in the classroom, maybe 20 or 30 years ago. But if they're not in the classroom right now, I don't want to hear from them. I want to hear from the teachers and the students.
Absolutely. So one of the things I think that you bring up, you give the example of if you do a lesson in one of these large language models, it comes out kind of vanilla, and there is no comparison to a really thoughtful, creative teacher. How do you engage teachers when you're working with them and they're starting to use these large language models for their lesson planning? What are some cautions? What are some things that you're saying you need to think about this as you enter into this dynamic of putting up a lesson and say, please differentiate, or whatever it might be? What are some of the cautions that you're working with when you're in a room of educators saying, oh, I can get all my lesson plans done?
I want to say, don't fall into that trap of thinking that AI can do your job for you, and all of those kinds of narratives that are out there at the moment. Look for ways that you can do your job better using this technology. In the school I worked at recently, I said, frame it like an assistive technology. How can you use this technology to improve your general day-to-day experience? And I run those sessions with a lot of examples and discussion of how might you take your normal process of curriculum design and then apply this technology to it. So I sat down with the faculty the other day. We had a meeting where they talked about some units that they wanted to plan for next semester. We recorded that meeting. We took the transcript and we put the transcript into generative AI. We grabbed some curriculum documents. We uploaded those alongside the transcript. We said, okay, give me a point-by-point summary of what we've talked about aligned to the curriculum standards. There's your starting point. And then we went back to discussion and we captured the next bit of discussion. Some teachers drew some things on the whiteboards and made a few notes. We took photos of that. We captured that and threw all of that into the AI. We kind of went backwards and forwards, very much like a normal curriculum design process where a faculty sits down and says, so what are we going to teach? Except we use the AI to kind of capture and synthesize and then to produce the documentation at the end.
So really what you're describing is, and Ethan Mollick always talks about this idea of as a collaborator. It's another team member. So you have a team of human beings, educators in the room, and you're leveraging the AI tool as another team member for periodic input and feedback. But really the driver is the human interaction and the human communication.
Yeah, and to remember always that this is technology. It's software. It's designed to do a thing. Now, the difference with AI and other software is we don't exactly know what that thing is. And we have this sort of discoverability problem of AI where we don't really know what it can and can't do. The only way to solve that is to get in there and kind of experiment with it. But teachers are often, they're pretty bowled over when you show things like, okay, because ChatGPT can write and execute code, or because Gemini can write and execute code, that means it can create file types, it can create documents, PowerPoints, it can convert from one file to another. You can do this, you can do that. Let's, start treating it like technology rather than treating it as this kind of magic button that's going to do all of the work for us. And teachers respond really well to that.
I think you're right. I think you mentioned earlier about lesson plans. I mean, and I agree with you that within Google Classroom you can now generate lesson plans automatically, etc. And I think it can be very vanilla. But I think, like John mentioned, thinking of AI as an assistant or as technology, because a lot of teachers, you've taught the same lesson for many years. You've kind of stuck to the same one. But if you generate a bunch of AI lesson plans, you're probably going to see 2 or 3 things you maybe haven't thought about, or maybe you're going to generate a test that's got some maybe you haven't differentiated it correctly and things like that. So I think not necessarily using it to generate the lesson plan or do the core task, but to critically improve what you've done. I think that's a huge benefit of AI for teachers.
Mm-hmm. And to bounce those ideas around.
Yep. So one of the things that all schools have is school leaders, and often the leadership team are designing the vision, the pedagogic values, and the pedagogic kind of roadmap. And it could be based on, we talked about different exams and assessments. What are you noticing in the way leaders that you're working with are engaging with this idea of AI, an AI-literate educator? What are some of the tensions that they're dealing with as they try to say, oh, I need to do something about this. I'm going to have Leon come into our school, and then we're all good to go. Kind of talk to me a bit about those creative tensions that you're noticing as you support schools, and especially, I imagine, interact with the school leaders to set things up.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really lucky that over the last few years, I've been able to shift so that most of my work with schools now happens over a term or 2 terms, or, I've got schools that I've been working with since 2023. So you can really see that progress of, yeah, okay, we start with the one-hit wonder professional development. Wow, this is AI, but then what do we do next? And it tends to go off in 2 directions. One is that, school leaders are often concerned with risk and safety. And so I talk to school boards and executive teams around some of those concerns. And then the other main one is their teachers. We know ultimately that school leaders are concerned about their students and the student outcomes. But sort of right in the middle there, the leaders that I work with, they're really concerned about teacher workload, teacher retention, high staff turnover, really high staff turnover in Australia at the moment, and inability to staff schools because there seems to be this huge teacher shortage, which I know is happening elsewhere in the world as well. So, is there a way that we can use this technology to reduce some of that administrative burden on teachers, or to allow teachers to work more flexibly? That's really the key thing that I'm sort of hearing from school leaders that I work with.
That's so interesting. And this idea of flexibility is so important, because sometimes in schools, it's really hard to create the spaces, as you had been sharing previously, to find that time and carve out that space just to have those conversations. One thing that you read about is, there are pundits that say that AI companies are shaping the future of education. And not that I agree with that, but that's often a narrative. And often this is ahead of ethics and regulations. But really, who controls what happens in the classroom? I mean, in your view, it's obviously educators, but some people might be of the opinion that actually, because these AI tools are encroaching in everything, kids have it on their phones, on Snapchat, now you have it in your Instagram feed, it's everywhere. And in your mind, Leon, who's in control in the classroom, or who should be in control?
This is the article that I wrote earlier this week on inevitability and ubiquity aren't the same thing. And we know a lot of technologies are increasingly ubiquitous. Smartphones are already ubiquitous. AI is now built into Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, into the hardware of new iPhones and all of this stuff. So we could argue that AI is already ubiquitous. But inevitability suggests that we've already given up. Inevitability is like, oh, well, everybody's got ChatGPT on their phones. OpenAI might as well teach us how to do everything from now on. And I don't think, I just don't see that. I don't see that on the ground. I don't see that level of despondency. What I see is teachers who are just as curious as the students around what it means for them. And I think that level of curiosity in the classroom, that's what really controls what happens. It's the ability for teachers and students to be curious and be critical and be kind of hands-on and practical with the technologies. Nobody has to buy into the line of, Sal Khan or any of the tech company CEOs that are saying the same thing, which is, AI tutors will just replace teachers. Nobody has to agree to that. I don't think the students would agree to that as much as I don't think the teachers would.
Yeah, absolutely not. And I think what's interesting is you're talking about this idea of a collective curiosity between the student and the educator and the setting of a school. When you talk about that curiosity, I think, one observation that I've made, and I don't know what you think, Dan, is for me, amongst a lot of technologies that have come into the education space, this is the first one where students and teachers are kind of equal players, in the sense this technology came, nobody knew anything about it before, and it's in the classroom, but kids got to tap into it as soon as teachers did.
Kids were ahead of teachers. Kids were definitely ahead of teachers.
In your opinion?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in terms of the figuring out how to get help writing assignments and stuff. I mean, just based on, like I was talking to my godson and recently about, he's at school in the UK in sixth form, and I think the level it's been used is not, and the sophistication that students have to get to get the text around the AI checkers is not yet really understood by a lot of educators. I think it's an age of student cheating, like we talked about before.
You have mentioned that before.
Yeah.
So, Leon, is it a level playing field now that students and teachers are both engaging with this new technology at the same time and have similar access? Because often in the past, you would have to have a school account for Microsoft. There were gatekeepers to this technology, the internet, and we had firewalls. But now pretty much anybody can access it anywhere. How has that changed the dynamic, you think, in the classroom when you talk about this collaborative curiosity?
I think, again, it comes back to that time and the space. Maybe students might have a little bit more time and space to play with the technology and a little bit more of a intrinsic motivation to do so, whereas the educators are perhaps hemmed in by the other responsibilities of the job, the work part of being a teacher. So, opportunities for teachers to be playful and creative and curious with AI are much more limited. We get into the English classroom, in my world, and the teacher has a book to teach and some skills and knowledge associated with that subject. We're not teachers of AI. We're teachers of literature or whatever. Outside of the classroom, maybe students are experimenting a lot more and getting a little bit further ahead in their understanding. So it's a little bit more about, what can we do to level that playing field and create those opportunities for teachers as well.
And when you work with educators, I assume you're also interacting with students. How are they reacting to it from your, because you're exposed to many different schools and you do research in this area. I'm curious, what are the kids saying compared to what the teachers are saying?
I mean, they have just as vast a range of opinions as the teachers. I heard from a group of students the other day who were equal parts worried about their own future careers and the implications of the technology for their career pathways, but also admitting that they were already using it for absolutely everything under the sun. I had some students say that they were concerned. They felt like they were concerned that it was harming their learning, that they were becoming too reliant on it already. And then I had some students say, it's the best thing ever. I couldn't get any of my work done without it. It's really helpful. It's helping to be more articulate. It's helping me to express myself, both sort of creatively, artistically, as well as in terms of the lesson content. So yeah, the full range of emotion.
That's great. And those are wonderful anecdotes of the different perceptions of this technology. Prior, you talked about this idea that, and you kept saying this, you've said it multiple times in the podcast today, is that this is a technology. it's not a magic button. Why are we sometimes kind of glossed over and we think it's a magic button? I know there's so much hype, if you follow and what these tech companies are trying to push and the silver bullet of everything. What is it about this magic bullet that, kind of maybe concerns you, and people thinking that instead of realizing, no, it's a technology like anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it always comes back to who does it serve. If you view the technology as magical or this kind of mystical thing that can just do everything, who benefits from that? Who benefits from more users, more data, more money? Because it's not the person using it; it's the company that sits behind it. And so there's an imperative from Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, Anthropic. There's an imperative to make it seem very magical or very human-like or very engaging. It's just like any technology. I always point out the really strong connections between AI companies and social media companies. Meta's the obvious one with Llama and their Facebook history, Instagram, WhatsApp. But you look at Elon Musk and X and Grok, you look at Sam Altman, who started life as a venture capital investor for Y Combinator that funded some of the biggest social media platforms in the US. The ties that bind AI to social media are really strong. And we've seen what happens when people start to use social media uncritically or unthinkingly. So we don't want to go down that path again. I think keeping these technologies in a space where we are critical and we are engaging with them more thoughtfully will serve as well for as long as we can manage it.
Yeah, and I think your point's so important, is this kind of intersection between social media and the AI companies. And now there's also the shopping module that ChatGPT is going to release. So it's kind of, a one-stop shop. You say we don't want to go there again, because obviously it sounds like we went there with social media. Do you think schools, have we learned from our social media lessons that we can't go there again?
I don't know. We're often doomed to repeat ourselves, aren't we? If we look at sort of globally at the moment, there seem to be a lot of situations that we're heading towards that you might think, oh, I'm sure we've been here before. We probably shouldn't go there again. But with this technology, what I am hopeful of is that maybe the younger people now encountering these technologies are already more familiar with some of the potential harms of the older technologies. Whereas, people of my age, we got social media when we were at university, and really, I mean, nobody saw it coming. Nobody knew what it was going to do. Nobody really questioned it for 10 years or so. So maybe the younger people who are coming into AI technologies are hopefully a little bit more aware than we were with social media.
It's interesting that you bring up that, the younger people being more aware. I know that I showed a video on how AI learns, and very simple for a group of children that were 11 years old. And it was about the relearning and the deep thinking and the machine learning and kind of identifying. It was a wonderful video done through TED Education by this lady, and I wish I remember her name. But most of the kids, when they realize that it can learn on their own, as kind of it's explained in the video, there was definitely a sense of like, I'm not sure I really like that. And, I'm wondering, when you hear these kids being more cautious, what makes them uncomfortable? What are you noticing when kids say to you, no, I think this is not a good thing? Do you have some responses and some feedback regarding that?
Yeah, I've heard from middle school students, sort of year 9 level students, 14, 15-year-olds, who say that interacting with chatbots is just, the word they used was cringe. And they just don't like the way that AI chatbots speak. They're sort of opposed to hearing a chatbot kind of interacting with them. They think it's awkward, and I've heard from students who think that it's boomer tech, and that it's just something that's been invented by old people that only old people think is cool. So, such is life. I think we always go through these cycles, don't we, where people who are maybe our age think that something is great and shiny and new, and younger people are immediately averse to it just because of that. So yeah, there's a whole range of reactions from young people to the technology. Sometimes aversion.
Yeah, and I think it's so good to see kids have that critical thinking mindset and saying that, yeah, I'm not comfortable with this, and highlighting. I love the anecdote where you say it's old people's technology. That's just a great one. Leon, so if you had to tell a school leader and they're coming and saying, Leon, you need to come and do a workshop because we're behind, or, what are some of the things that you want people not to fall into the trap of when they're thinking about AI and professional development, especially from your experience in using AI for assessment? What are some of the cautions you would, or not cautions, just some guideposts that you think you want people to consider?
Firstly, I get a phone call or an email a few times a week from schools that say, we're so far behind. And I think if 100 schools have just emailed me in the last 3 months saying we're far behind, who are you behind? You're obviously all at the same point. Yeah. And I think that's important to acknowledge, is that everybody's on the same journey. And I work with other industries. Like my first conference this year was for a group of chartered accountants. They said, oh, we're so far behind. So, well, who are we behind? We're behind influencers posting on social media, making it sound like everybody's using AI for everything. The reality is we're all a very similar part of the journey. The technology in this form is only 2 years old. Dial down the panic a little, and we'll all figure it out together.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. I like the way you state, if 100 people write to you that we're behind, who are you behind? And I think it's about keeping up with the Joneses and this feeling. And I think there's a wonderful book. I don't know if you guys know it. It's called AI Snake Oil. It's by these two professors at Princeton. And I think it's one of the, because, this document came out called AI 2027. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Leon. It's kind of a prediction of where we're going with AI. And it's quite doomsday and very dark and dystopian. And AI Snake Oil really kind of takes your point that this is a technology. And it's another tool, and let's think of it like that, and let's be really clear what it does and doesn't do. Do you think sometimes the magic button gets in the way of people being able to calm themselves down?
Yeah, I think hype on both sides is unhelpful, isn't it? Existential threat on one end and magic buttons on the other, and you'll find the truth somewhere in the middle. Like, this ChatGPT is not going to suddenly evolve and eat the world, nor is it going to solve all of your life's problems and put you onto universal basic income. So somewhere in the middle, I think all things will sort of pan out.
Yeah, and that's so refreshing to hear from you bring that up. So, Leon, we're coming to the end of our podcast, and I'd just love you to kind of, if you had to talk to a student, an educator, and a leader from the work that you've done, specifically on AI and assessment and all the workshops that you're doing in your doctoral research, what are just some, 3 separate things, one for a student, one for a teacher, and one for a school leader that you would want them to reflect upon or just walk away with the thought?
I think these are all variations on the same point, which is around transparency. But I think for students, it's, talk to your teachers about how you're using the technology and why. And for teachers, be open and honest with the students around what you see as this technology meaning for your subject area and your expertise. What does this mean for the English teacher? What does it mean for the maths teacher? And for school leaders, sort of, dial down the panic, allow some of the technology to kind of, wash over you and take that broader look across what's happening and say, so what does this mean for my school and my students? What does it mean for us in whatever our context is? Every school is very different. We don't have to be trying to, play keep up with one another, but we all have to acknowledge that, the teachers, the students, the school leaders, none of us know what's going on. None of us can predict the future. so we have those open and transparent conversations about it.
Yeah, and I think this idea of transparency is so critical. It's just being very upfront. And I think sometimes I've been in rooms where teachers are ashamed that they're using AI. Like that means they're not a good teacher. Or students are kind of hiding it because they're basically thinking of plagiarism. So I think this idea of transparency and being very open is so important. Leon, if we're going to come to the summer here, all schools, well, you have it, it's going to be your winter in Australia, but there's often a long break. And then we come to a new academic year. Do you have any ideas? Where do you see this all going? I mean, does Leon have a crystal ball or any patterns that you're noticing that you would like to share?
Yeah, so I write a series of posts, and I sort of update it every 6 months or so, called the near future of AI, which sounds very dramatic. And I like to say the near future so that I don't have to actually commit to anything particularly important. But what I do think is, I think that wearable technologies, things like Meta's Ray-Ban collaboration and the way that that uses Meta AI with image recognition and voice mode, speech to speech, I think that's going to be a huge part of the future of this technology. And I think if you look at Apple, Meta, all of those big technology companies will push towards wearables and the integration of AI into wearable tech. I think that the multimodality of AI will continue to increase. Image in, image out, audio out, text in, video out, all of that stuff. And that the way that we interact with digital devices, computers, smartphones, will fairly significantly change. If you look at technologies like operator, computer use, styles of technologies, I'm thinking that those types of tech will be pretty much as standard by 12 to 18 months on new devices.
Oh, interesting. And that obviously brings a whole new dynamic to the classroom. I know some schools are banning cell phones, and now they're banning Apple Watches. And then next will be Ray-Bans. Exactly. So, there's always this, one thing, and as we wrap up, one thing that you said is AI will not replace teachers. You stand by that?
Yeah, I hope so. I think that, it's interesting to me that Bill Gates was, famously just recently said that AI will replace teachers. In his own biography, he dedicates an entire chapter to talking about his favorite teacher. So, I'm going to call him out on that. I'm going to call hypocrisy. I'm not sure if he listens to your podcast. I'm sure he does. But I'm going to say, you spent a whole chapter of your biography talking about your favorite teacher, but you are saying you're going to deny future generations that experience. I think it's rubbish. It's a cop-out. Of course, there'll still be teachers.
Yeah. I'm excited to be in this profession. It's just such a wonderful space to be surrounded by children and learning. Leon, thank you so much. And I really want to thank you for all the work that you're doing and the generosity in sharing it on social media. And if you have not spent any time on Leon's website or followed his work, it's a must-do. He really creates some amazing resources, and it's super thoughtful, and you really bring a certain calmness to this space, and really your kind of middle ground level-headedness is so appreciated, and we really appreciate you spending the time. I know you're super busy, but thank you so much for being on the International Schools Podcast, and we really look forward to continuing to seeing what you're doing, and I'm a huge fan, so I feel very privileged to have had the luxury of you being in the room with me for a while.
Thank you, John and Dan, for the invitation.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll see you at the next podcast. Thank you again, all.